when we talk from internal models approach point of view, model validation becomes very, very important. So those of you who are from banking or from consulting side of things, you'll already be familiar with the role of model validation. But for others, a quick overview of validation. So take an example of any bank. So within every bank, you'll have someone who is called as a model development team, and another team which is independent of the development team is what we call as the model validations team. Now, model developers are those set of personnel who are going to develop new models or maybe make enhancements to the current models as and when required. So these are also what we call as quantitative developers. Now, however, any model which is developed, that is something which cannot be used directly by the business, because if it's used by the business directly, then there may be certain gaps in the model, isn't it? Because there can always be certain assumptions which could be incorrect, or maybe there could be something which might have been missed in the model code, etc. So that way, something which is developed by the model developers will not directly be used by business, but this is something which will be passed on to model validation personnel. Now, model validation team are going to do a validation of whatever has been developed. So, be it a new model or if there are any enhancements to the current model. So, validation team is expected to review those things independently. And uh, during that process, the validation team might have certain questions, or they could have queries, or they could find gaps, which will be then presented to the model developers in order to answer and resolve those gaps. Once those gaps have been addressed and model validation gives a sign off, then any model will be can then be passed on to the business for their consumption. So this is a brief idea behind what we call as model validation. Now, again, for model validation, there can be different setups. So a bank might want to have an independent team within its own workforce, which is going to act as model validation personnel, or they might want to hire external consultants who provide services on model validation. Now, coming back to model validation standards as per required by FRTB. Now, therefore, anything which is under IMA will require a lot of validations, which is either done by qualified external or independent internal teams. Now, validation needs to be done in two scenarios: when there are significant structural changes in the market. So when you say structural change, maybe something which was relevant a few years back isn't now. So that's like a structural change, right? Or there can also be significant changes in the composition of the portfolio. So naturally, at that time, it will be a good idea to do a quick validation as well. Now, the model validation will review a few things. So one is backtesting. Now, backtesting is something which we use even in the current setups where banks are using the value at risk. We have the backtesting of VAR as well. So more about backtesting coming up. So so its review of backtesting results, its P&L attribution, because as we saw, as per IMA, as the daily MTMing happens, the daily MTMing will have an impact on the profit and loss, and this attribution also becomes a key. So that's why reviewing this is important. And any other tests that are used to demonstrate that the assumptions which made are appropriate. So basically, the thing is, in addition to this, there can always be something more, isn't it? Because when we talk from IMA perspective, naturally we are looking at more and more complex model setups. So as the model setups get more and more complex, there can be certain additional tests which might have to be applied, maybe hypothesis or other statistical tests to understand, to just to be sure that we are not underestimating risk. So at that time, any additional things will need to be reviewed as well. Model validation must use hypothetical changes in the portfolio in case where EOD positions are remaining unchanged. And each trading desk has to satisfy P&L attribution and backtesting requirements on an ongoing basis. So this is a requirement under FRTB-IMA.